The year was 2007. It was a warm, breezy afternoon. The kind of afternoon where you leave all the windows open and everything smells just right. It was on that afternoon that my dad brought home a video game from the flea market for my hand-me-down PS1 I got from my older brother. The game was called Rival Schools. It seemed interesting enough, a bunch of cool fighter guys on the cover, and a neat name were all it really took to get me to play it. But when I popped the game in, and I got to the character select screen, I saw her, Akira, a buff, badass girl boss adorned in skull-themed paraphernalia, all wrapped in a biker aesthetic. And right there, a fascination was born. It wasn't a crush. It'd be a while before I discovered those sexually turbocharged thoughts. No, it was something different. I didn't want to kiss Akira. I wanted to be her.
False needles in my neck. Do a dance 'cause I'm tripping on the boardwalk, plants in front of me. Mountains of batteries leaking their ass in a passive mistake. I swim in as my lips shake.
So what's up with trans people and video games? Okay, sorry, I'll be serious now. But the question does still stand. What's up with trans people in video games? I mean, out of any fandom I've seen on the internet, video games and associated gamer culture are surprisingly the places where I see the most trans people, both reflected in its most relevant community members and its representation in the media itself. Like, sure, comic and anime fans are trans, but their representation is either very limited or not there at all. Whereas video games have been blazingly more trans-friendly as time has moved forward, at least in comparison to other forms of media. So, what's going on here? Why are more trans people enjoying video games than any other form of media? And why are video games able to depict such explicitly trans themes, whereas other forms of media either don't try or fail stupendously at it? Seriously, what the fuck was this? What about video games and gamer culture causes this phenomenon? Well, I've got a few theories and anecdotes from my own experience, but before we start, I want to throw out some caveats. Firstly, this essay has largely been written from the point of view of an AMAB, that's short for assigned male at birth for anyone who doesn't know, transgender person. And because of that, a lot of the writing and thoughts in this video will skew to that perspective, since that's my own lived experience. I am a transgender woman who was assigned male at birth, and so, unfortunately, there are some things I simply can't comment on, since I have no experience with it, or just simply don't understand it. I also decided to write this from that point of view, since, at least where I'm standing from, it seems that most trans people who play video games are AMAB, which makes sense if you think about it. Gaming is still seen as a mostly male-dominated hobby, so it makes sense that a large majority of trans people who play games are AMAB since they got introduced to the hobby early in life. Honestly, if there are any AFAB trans people who want to comment here and have a discussion on your view of this topic, I honestly would be fascinated. I think that's honestly a very valuable opinion, one I unfortunately couldn't write about here. Even so, I hope the themes and things I discuss in this video are broad enough that you guys can take something away from it, even if you aren't exactly me. Nextly, I want to say a lot of this video will be conjectured without a lot of scientific evidence or data to back up my points. I tried to look for any studies or papers done on these subjects, but ultimately came out totally empty-handed. So unfortunately, a lot of the talking points in this video will be using the worst kind of evidence. Anecdotal! But I hope you guys will hear out what I have to say nonetheless. Although I will say, if you're a college student looking for a good final project idea, I think collecting data on transgender gamers and their gaming habits would honestly kind of be a fucking rad idea. But that's just my opinion. Okay, with all that out of the way, we can get into it. Part 1. Fighting Games and Identity. One of the first times I ever met a transgender person was at a local Skullgirls tournament. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Wow, Zayda, you're a trans woman who likes Skullgirls. What's next? You're a bisexual who likes Mitski? And first off, rude. Second off, yes I am, and I do. But most importantly is where that love of fighting games took me. See, more than any other esport, transgender individuals often see themselves at the forefront of competition in the world of competitive fighting games. From commentators and players like Kuba, Kelly or SQ, Ricky Ortiz, or probably the best known trans player in the community, the legendary Sonic Fox, who's defined the competitive landscape for multiple different games for years. Seeing these high-level players as a young kid still thoroughly stuck in her egg allowed me to start connecting with my transness. And it's not like my interaction with trans people ended at seeing them at high-level play. A lot of fighting games owe their entire scene to largely LGBTQ player bases. I mean, shit, there's even a meme in the Skullgirls community that the only player in top 8s who isn't LGBTQ is the Killsage. And even then, he's been very active and loud in his allyship. So what's going on here? Why are trans people so able to access high competitive play here? Whereas in any other esport, the entire player base seems to be strongly cishet dominated. Well, I have a few theories based on my own experience. Firstly is that, ironically, since fighting games have no teammates, they are less susceptible to the active vitriolic bigotry that's present in most competitive games. Most esports are cooperative experiences, from team shooters like CSGO or Overwatch, to MOBAs like League of Legends or Dota 2. This unfortunately means that most esport games will match you with a team of complete strangers. These strangers who comprise your team are given absolutely no incentive for sportsmanlike behavior or hell, even basic human respect. It's this exact type of culture that makes it impossible for me to enjoy games like Overwatch or Valorant. Or hell, basically every new first-person shooter is kind of off the table for me at this point. Because God forbid I ask my teammates to call me she, her, lest I face an endless torrent of slurs and derogatory language. It also doesn't help that most of these games have severely lacking abuse report systems. Like, aw, thanks Blizzard, I'm glad you're looking into it and will take further action. But this guy is calling me a slur now, and I would appreciate some help now. Fighting games, on the other hand, totally avoid this trap. Most, if not all, fighting games completely ditch the voice chat mechanic in its entirety for online play. This allows trans people who want a competitive experience without the torrent of verbal abuse to participate and learn the game in an online environment that's safe for them. This is doubly true for most local fighting game tournaments. In a social situation where you're sitting next to your opponent in physical space and find yourself surrounded by all your peers who live in the same area as you, there's an unspoken social contract of respect that's in place to make these communities function. You can't be a shitty transphobe at a local fighting game tournament because 10 out of 10 times you're outnumbered and will be immediately kicked out for that kind of behavior. Then also, local fighting game tournaments are seen as the lifeblood of fighting games. It is expected for you to go to these local events if you want to improve. This creates a community that serves as both a venue for competitive play and a safe space and social venue for those with non-gender conforming identities. This is why you see so many trans people at high levels of play. In any other esport, the team dynamics would have locked them out, but thanks to the strong systems of safety that the FGC implements, they're able to join. Trans competitors can make it to the top. This, in turn, attracts more trans players to these games, seeing a safe community for them to participate in. This large community of respect is what keeps me playing these fighting games even now. It's totally understandable that trans people would find this space comforting, cause hell, I have. That, and I think there's also another reason for the high trans player base, and perhaps this is a bit more of an emotionally driven thought as opposed to a more technical one. But I think it may also have to do with the specific power fantasy that fighting games provide. Fighting games are games of chosen identity mechanically. Your ability to interact with the game and how you express yourself and interact with other players is based off of which character you pick. This character ultimately serves as your identity from both a gameplay and aesthetic front. Thus, fighting games reward you for mastery of that gameplay identity. Sure, anyone can play Mae from Guilty Gear, but can you master being her? I think this, in a weird way, reflects the trans experience. A long journey of fighting to discover how you will present your own identity, both medically and socially, are the defining shared experiences of trans people. Trans people are gifted with the ability of getting to choose who we are, but on the other hand, we often have to struggle for a lifetime with finding true comfort and contempt with the identity we chose. I think in this way, fighting games are a comforting power fantasy for a lot of us. It's a world where we get to choose our own identity and are rewarded for discovering aspects of that identity. It's a world where being comfortable with yourself lets you fire giant dumb anime lasers. And for a lot of trans people, that's a kindness that real life rarely gives us. Trans people are already blamed for basically everything that's wrong with the world simply for existing, so it's understandable that we wouldn't want to hop on a video game and get blamed as well by our teammates. But fighting games give trans people a world where they get the gift of victory for skills that we develop over a lifetime. We get to choose our own identity, and we get to champion it. And I think that's a power fantasy that trans people really deserve. But what if you want a cooperative experience? Well... Part 2. Final Fantasy XIV and a Society for the Transgender. One of the first experiences I ever had with experimenting in my gender expression was my first time playing Final Fantasy XIV. When I started the game, I decided I'd play as a girl without much thought. I always picked girls in character creators and video games growing up. You know, #just egg things. So, much the same as all those other times, I just made the pretty girl I wanted to be. Not because I was like trans or anything, I swear guys, wink wink. But quickly I discovered something unique to this world that I hadn't experienced in real life. Nobody bothered me about my genetic sex. Now, I'm sure that a lot of you are like, no duh, Zayda, of course they don't care. But this layer of obfuscation gave me comfort to experiment with my gender identity. See, in this online space, it was just accepted that genetic sex was a completely unprovable aspect of you. After living my entire life in a world where I was entirely judged and examined under the lens of my genetic sex. To have a social setting where that was unprovable brought me comfort and peace that I never knew before. A feeling that at the time I didn't understand, but now I realize was gender euphoria. I remember the first time I visited a guild and a group of players asked me if they could refer to me by she or her, and at the time I nervously typed out, "Yes." Afterwards, I felt like I almost got away with something, when in actuality, it was just me taking my first step to becoming the gender I was always meant to be. And I don't think I'm alone in that experience. I mean, I know I'm not, since a lot of servers on Final Fantasy XIV are known as the LGBTQ ones. By the way, shout out to my homies from the Fairy server. Miss y'all, bless up. Okay, back to what I was saying. I think Final Fantasy XIV and many other MMORPGs provide an incredibly useful tool to trans people. It provides them a low-scale society in which they get to participate without their genetic sex having to be a factor. See, humans are naturally social animals, so we do value being part of a group quite a bit. Having a job, a friend group, hosting events, even establishing organizations are all just part of human nature. But for a lot of trans people, they are discouraged and discriminated against in social circles due to their genetic factors, both in major and minor ways. I think in this way, MMORPGs provide that ability for social interaction and cooperation in a safe setting that's divorced enough from the cruel reality of the world. So divorced that we don't have to fear engaging. We can create giant thriving communities and build neighborhoods in the Realms Reborn, where in real life, society pushes us out of those opportunities. In a weird way, these MMOs and their huge economies and housing systems provide trans people a fantasy many of us have been barred away from. For most people, they play these games for the fantasy of, like, being a wizard. But for a lot of trans people, having a community of friends and living in a gorgeous house with a white picket fence is just as beautiful and unattainable a fantasy. In this way, it's completely understandable that these spaces would serve as a shelter and second home for a lot of trans people. A society without genetic sex is a utopia for most trans people, a place so far from the discrimination they face every day that they can live the peaceful life they want. A life where they have a community, a society, and an economy that values them and respects them. A place where they're not treated as an oddity, but the same as everyone else. These MMORPGs serve as a society for the transgender. But even after saying all that, I still haven't answered my core question. I started this video with, what is it about video games in general that appeal to trans people? What's the core thing about this art form that appeals to us so deeply? What is it? Part 3. The Top of the Mountain. Celeste is a 2018 indie action platformer game. The game stars Madeline, an introverted trans woman, as its primary protagonist, and follows her on her journey up the mountain of Celeste as she struggles against the absurd challenges of the mountain, as well as her own anxieties from a difficult life leading up to her decision to climb. As she attempts to climb the mountain, she's warned and discouraged from doing so on multiple occasions, not only by people she meets along the way, but by the manifestations of her own anxiety. This tight but simple narrative, combined with an incredibly complex, challenging, and fun gameplay, won it the Game Award that year for Best Indie Game and Game for Change. To this day, it is the only game to win an award at the Game Awards with a transgender protagonist, which is actually surprising. It feels like, as time marches on, we see more and more trans narratives in gaming, with games like Secret Little Haven, Tell Me Why, and Catherine Fullbody. These narratives are so much more relevant in gaming than in other art forms. But why? Well, it's simple, really. Because video games are the perfect vehicle for the type of media trans people need right now. Film, literature, and music open the door to allow us into other people's lives. But the journey of gender discovery and self-actualization are so personal that others' experiences may not be helpful. Now, don't get me wrong, trans representation is great, and it does help us in our struggle for rights. But as a tool to soothe the soul, being told, don't worry, other people have gone through this, isn't the biggest help in the world when it's the 100th time you've heard it. But video games tell you, personally, that everything will be alright. They show you, through your actions, that you do have what it takes to take action and to be happy. Unlike TV and movies, it doesn't beat you down with grim presentations of the struggles in your life, nor does it show you fluffy, easy, kind material to make you feel better. It presents you with challenges, interactions, and experiences that inform your own journey to overcome the odds. In a world that punishes trans people for being exceptional, for being different, for speaking up, for existing, video games remind us that we are strong enough to overcome it. It's the story about us. Other art forms present us as representation. They show us off as an object. But video games interact with you personally, and in that personality, they gain their impact. At least they do for me, because I can feel the truth of the message of I'll get through this fine, when it's me getting through this, not somebody else, not a character on screen, but me. I can carry the swords of my own liberation. I can rise above the competition, and I can climb the mountain. I'm done being told how I'm going to be discriminated against or how I'm valid by strangers. I want to take my life into my own hands and smash and tear my way through the barriers that have been put in my way. I don't want to simply exist, and I don't want respect. I want to excel in the person, the woman I truly am. Video games matter so much to me and to other trans people because they remind us of the top of the mountain when we're in its deepest valleys. They give us a dose of motivation and confidence in a cruel world that beats us down. When I see Madeline climb that mountain, I see myself climbing and scraping and fighting against the challenges life throws at me. When I see people trying to discourage her, I see the people who told me I'd never pass even if I transitioned. When I see her struggle against her doubts and anxieties, I see the internalized transphobia and fear that kept me from transitioning for years. In shattering the struggles and battling through the tough times with Madeline, I see how far I can go. It isn't a story on the screen divorced from me. It's my story. It's showing me that I'll do it. I can make it. I'll never forget the stories of me battling through dungeons in the Realm Reborn with my friends. I'll always hold close memories of the kind trans people who helped me learn how to play Philia on a Discord server. And more importantly than anything, I'll never forget loading up that character select screen and seeing Akira. I don't remember these because they were stories about trans people, but because they were stories about me. They were my story. A story where friends had my back. A story where I grew and learned my identity. And a story where I'll overcome and see the horizon at the peak someday. When I stand at the top of that mountain, with the crushed form of stardust I call a body, I'll remember all those stories. Because they made me the woman I was always meant to be. So, what's up with trans people in video games? Simple. Other mediums will only half-heartedly tell our story. But video games, they let us experience our story. They assure us there's a happy ending. And for a moment, they let us see the peak of the mountain.
Hey guys, text-to-speech Zayda here to do the end card cause I can't be fucked to record more audio. Thanks for watching all the way through. Sorry this video took so long, LMAO. I had to scrap like 3 video ideas before I finally finished one I liked enough to upload. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If you want to keep up with what I am doing, please consider subscribing. Or follow me on Twitter at ZaydaTFT. I hope you have a great day. Trans rights are human rights and I'll see you later. Bye.